Welcome everyone. I'm Roshnii and I'm representing Systems Change Alliance. We are a group with the goal of bringing together...
Sorry, Roshnii, it's not
sorry.
on yet.
Oh, it's
just let
not
you know.
Okay, sorry, it says live in the corner, so...
Now you're live.
Okay. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Roshnii and I'm representing Systems Change Alliance. Our goal is to form a working alliance of groups and individuals who are motivated to create positive and lasting systemic change in the areas of environment, economy, society, and politics. And our work centers around the principle that the challenges that we face are interconnected and overlapping, and that we can't address one without looking at the big picture. So joining me this morning, or in his case this evening in Australia, is Damon Gameau. Damon is an actor, a writer and a director. That Sugar film was Damon's first feature-length film as a director and won Best Documentary at the Australian Actor Awards and became the highest grossing documentary in Australia of all time. Damon's new film, 2040, is an innovative feature documentary that explores what the future would be like by the year 2040 if we embrace the best solutions already available to us to improve the planet, our planet. It was released last year in April and is already in the top 5 highest grossing documentaries of all time in Australia at the cinema. Damon has become a sought-after speaker and spoke at the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit in New York. He's also addressed numerous governments around the world and has spoken at organizations such as Google, BP, Zurich, Atlassian, and many more. He was a New South Wales nomination for Australian of the Year in 2020. Wow, that's quite something, Damon. Thanks so much for joining us, Damon. I'm really excited to meet you and to talk to you all about 2040 because I love the film. And I wanted to start by sharing the trailer, if you don't mind, so that those people out there who haven't yet seen the film can have a little taste of what it's about. So we'll just get that going.
My name is...
Looks like it might have frozen.
Yeah, it froze for me too, but I didn't know if it was just me.
No,
okay.
I think so.
Tiago,
I can describe the feel if it helps.
Oh, I'm
direction.
Oh.
Maybe it's farming, or it can be energy, it can be housing, or empowering girls.
I'd like to...
Okay, let's pause the trailer there because we're having some technical glitches. Damon, just give us a little overview then of the film. Give us your spoken trailer.
Yeah, it's ostensibly a letter to my daughter, who was 4 at the time, and it shows her what the world could look like in 2040 if we put into practice the best solutions that are available. And I called it an exercise in fact-based dreaming, because everything I show her in 2040 has to exist now in some form. So it's sort of an extrapolation of the best things that we have right now available to us. And that was the big takeaway from making this film, was that we aren't waiting for a technology or a silver bullet or something to arrive. We've got everything we need in this moment to turn this whole thing around. And that was incredibly heartening to discover that. And I also then used lots of VFX in the film to show what that future could look like. So we had a huge VFX team that were doing rooftop gardens, driverless cars, revegetation of landscapes, giant kelp forests out at sea, microgrid energy networks that connect households and batteries, and made sure that people were sort of triggered in their imagination to think what it might look like on the other side of this crisis.
Yeah, thanks. something that really struck me about the film was there's something quite playful and humorous at times about it. And also, yeah, you've integrated all these animations and kind of simulations that really take us into a different reality. But that humor and that it's a kind of unconventional approach for documentary making, and maybe it's a bit your signature style. Also, having seen your previous film, that Sugar film, how do you think that approach impacts the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I love documentaries, but they can be very reverential sometimes and quite earnest and justifiably so. Sometimes they're very serious topics, but I think the flaw of them is that they can play to a very select audience. And I always felt that some of these topics actually need to be broadened and need to be amplified to the people that actually need to see them. So with Sugar, I guess it could have been easy to make a film about how bad it is and sort of this sort of villainous, ominous kind of film. But I thought, well, no, I'd rather actually show people how much better their life can be if they cut back their sugar and actually frame that problem within a solutions lens. And then I just saw how well that did, especially with school children and, you know, councils and communities. And I just thought, well, there's an opportunity here to do something similar with climate, that we've only used that apocalyptic doom narrative when it comes to climate. And again, rightly so, it's a very urgent issue, but the neuroscience is really interesting there on the paralysis that can cause if we're only using that approach. So I just thought there was an opportunity to offer up a concurrent narrative to sit alongside all those apocalyptic ones, and so chose to focus on a more hopeful, more optimistic film, but again, made sure it was very grounded in reality. It wasn't a utopian fancy. And in fact, we've had a lot of really organizations like Project Drawdown, which your listeners might be familiar with, who actually did a proper modeling on what we showed and said that, you know, we can get there by 2041. So I felt a lot more bullish about sharing this with the world and getting it out there, and that it is very much a muscular hope or a grounded optimism. It's not really bad parenting on my behalf of saying to my daughter, hey, everything's going to be fine, don't worry about it, we got this in the bag. I didn't want to do that. So I think that's why the film has resonated well with people.
Yeah, and I think it will appeal to young people too. I actually watched it with my eldest son, who's 11, and he really enjoyed it. It really had an impact on him.
Great.
Yeah, and I think it's that solution focused approach is so crucial. We need it so much in these times, especially when there's so much scaremongering. And then, I mean, not just, well, just let's say more problem focused reporting from all angles, you know, also the environmental groups and so on obviously have a reason to be to want to really shake people. But a lot of our big focus in Systems Change Alliance is really looking at the solutions and not staying hooked on the problems. But, you know, that can be challenging in these times. What did you find most challenging about making the film?
Challenging is an interesting question. I mean, anytime you make a film, you know, it's an incredible journey. Just the collaborative nature of it and the craft of putting a film together is extraordinary if you've never done it before. It's just a sort of a pooling of all sorts of different energies and information, and then trying to structure that in a way that's appealing and not too dry or academic, and it has emotion in it and it's moving. So it's a beautiful challenge. But probably this one in particular, because obviously I was aware of the systemic nature of the problem, and how do you condense you know, agriculture, energy, oceans, resource use into a palatable 90-minute film. It's almost impossible. So that was incredibly difficult, trying to reduce what was initially a 3.5-hour cut down to something that was going to be accessible to younger kids, which I wanted this to be a family film, especially the kids who aren't getting anywhere near enough of these hopeful narratives, and to be shown the people that do care about their future and these great things that we can do. So I'd say the challenge was probably what to leave out. And there were so many solutions that I explored that I had to leave out. But the toughest part was probably what your organization's probably interested in, is the architecture, or the flawed architecture of this current system that doesn't allow us to move ahead as fast as we can. The incentives that we have in our current system, how we reward narcissistic sociopathic behaviors that push people to the top that don't necessarily have our best interests at heart. They then get to set the rules of the game. We have these hierarchies of corporate control. I had probably 45 minutes of the film in there about that. And unfortunately, the kids during that part were just like, whoop, what's going on there? Like, so I made the tough decision to say, you know what, I'm going to keep this aspirational as a film, as a Trojan horse. And then if people want to do the deep dive, we can do that. And we'll have that on our website. And actually, it was ultimately, in hindsight, it's been the smartest thing to do, because we have screened the film in so many corporate groups, from, you know, BPs to all our major banks, and they wouldn't have gone in there if I was too aggressive on a sort of anti-systemic rant. So I was able to have those conversations once we got into the doors, and I could say, well, hey, climate change is a symptom of something at its root that isn't working, and your organization's complicit in that, whether you know it or not. Here's how many resources we're using. Here's what exponential growth is doing to us. So that was great. And like I said, that wouldn't have happened if I'd come on too strong initially.
Yeah, I was interested to see that how you're kind of infiltrating the corporate world, because I could see that you've been working in that field. And I was curious to know how you see the kind of current economic situation changing in order to support that 2040 vision that you've created.
Yeah, as with anything these days, that's a very complex answer. So on the one hand, there are organizations making some very bold progressive statements right now. And you know, in terms of an energy carbon emissions story, they're probably doing, you know, the right thing. You've got companies like Microsoft that are not only going renewables, but they're offsetting all their emissions back to the 1970s. Or Apple, Google, they've all pledged renewables 100%. In Australia, a lot of our companies are starting to do that. We've even seen Walmart in the US not only pledge to go zero emissions by 2040, but all their supply chains, electric trucks, and they're going to regenerate 50 million acres of land in the US and protect 100 million square miles of ocean by 2030. So that's for Walmart to do that. Great, let's give them a tick. But if you go deeper down, as you know, if we just deal with our carbon emissions and deal with climate change, and yet we've still got massive income inequality, or we're still overusing our resources, like a company like Walmart, and we're not truly circular, then really, you know, what's the point? That's my fear, is that these companies are doing the right thing with climate, but it's sort of justifying predatory capitalism, again, hierarchical structures. You know, we've got 3 companies that own 90% of companies on the American Stock Exchange. I mean, that is a flawed system. So I think we might get to that once we're further down the road of progress on climate. We need to focus on that, and I understand that. So large-scale wind, solar farms, even though they're not perfect, I'd rather all be localized and decentralized, and we have energy sovereignty for different communities. But we might have to potentially relinquish that dream for a little bit longer to get us out of the danger zone. And then we might be able to have conversations around these other issues that we're discussing. I'm not sure we're capable of doing them all at once. Potentially we are. Mm-hmm. And that's why I put Kate Raworth's beautiful donut economics model in the film, because I just think it's a beautiful transition before we get to the next system, whatever that's going to be that we're all going to design together over the next 40, 50, 100 years. We need something to bridge us, to stop the hemorrhaging before we design that system. And I searched long and hard to find where that might be, and was delighted to see Kate's work.
Yeah, I think you're right that we have to kind of approach this in a transition, with a transition mindset. You know, you talk about the fact that change can happen very quickly once things are put into place. You know, you demonstrate that with the agricultural practices, for example. But but that at the same time, it can be easy to get kind of, yeah, like you say, paralyzed, overwhelmed, or stuck in this place of powerlessness of how can I act in a system that is kind of pitted against this transformation. And yeah, but what you're talking about sounds promising, and perhaps while those corporate monopolies are still operating, there's still scope for local economies to start building themselves up from the grassroots up, and to kind of be shifting things from the bottom up approach, and so that then by the time we get to that more systemic economic stuff, we've got some real good models in place to then expand upon.
That's right. And people are feeling empowered in their own communities, because I think that's what this is about, is that, you know, we've outsourced so much governance and decision making to transnationals or to governments that are a long way from our regions. And I think that's why we're seeing, you know, one of the many issues that people are shifting to the right is they're sort of saying, well, I'm sick of that. I know what's going on in my region. I understand the nuance of my own community. I want more control on that. And that's the moment we have here, especially, you know, post-COVID, where the sort of the globalist structures have sort of dissolved temporarily, that I think that conversation of food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, production sovereignty is really alive at the moment. And I hope that we understand we can never go back to what we were doing. It was too fragile. It was a 20th century system that isn't adequate for the 21st century in terms of how brittle it was. And you saw all these effects of whether it was, you know, pesticides not getting to Africa, so they had a huge plague because they couldn't be delivered, or masks not being available, or medication because it was coming from China, or, you know, the horrible stories of, you know, how many pigs were euthanized because the restaurants shut down. The system was too efficient. It was running too well. And so I hope that this moment has said, no, we need to prepare ourselves for more pandemics and more climate shocks, because we have to be honest, they're going to be in our future. We're not going to turn it around quick enough. We're going to have to mitigate, be resilient at the same time as we're regenerating. All those things have to happen concurrently. So you're right. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to get to know our own region again, localize, empower ourselves up. And as you said, start to rise from the grassroots up, and then change the system that way.
Yeah. So your film, it's more than just a film. It's become a springboard for a whole social action movement, hasn't it? Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So I guess, again, big fan of documentaries, but often feel this emotion at the end of the film, and then I don't have anything to do with it, and I often get frustrated by that because I want to get involved. And so I guess a lot of learnings from Sugar was that we gave people an outlet once they'd finished the film to deal with their own sugar consumption, educate their kids, whatever it might have been. We just gave it a few different choices. And so I just thought that was really important with this one, but we did it differently this time, in that we built that outreach impact campaign as we were making the film. So we teamed up with about 50 different organizations. So people, when they're finished, can go to the website. There's a button that says activate your own plan. And then rather than being prescriptive and just sort of giving this generic suite of actions for people, we really got specific and asked people what their own passions and interests were, how much time they have available, if they could give any money financially or donate, all these questions. And then that spat them out their own plan based on those preferences of 6 or 7 things to do. And to me, that's what I'm proud of the most, is our community is extraordinary, and they've brought to life a lot of the solutions that you've seen in the film. So, you know, they're building a seaweed platform in Tasmania here because we raised, you know, almost $1 million from just people's donations. And the same with the microgrid setup. There's an equity crowdfund model, which again, I think is really interesting moving forward, that rather than just, again, have a few owners, we did an equity model where everyone could own this new technology. And so ended up having almost 300 investors to build and co-own this decentralized energy network. We've had 1 million children be taught our curriculum materials. So 35,000 teachers. And again, that's because the teachers are saying, we are sick of teaching the kids how much plastic's in the ocean, or how we're destroying this forest, or we're sending animals extinct. They're desperate to hear about what they can do to make it better. What are the jobs of the future to turn this around? So again, it's not to shy away from the urgency and how dire things are, but I think we've got to be very strategic and understand the psychology of it, and actually start telling inspirational stories and using examples of what communities, regions, individuals are doing right around the world to get more and more people involved, get them to feel part of something extraordinary. And I guess that's what I feel now, is that very privileged to be alive in this moment, because I do think, I mean, we're seeing an energy transition that's going to happen. And historically, people will look back and go, imagine being around then when they transitioned from fossil fuels to clean energy. Like we're in that moment right now. And we forget that sometimes. And the same thing's going to happen in agriculture in my lifetime. And I think we'll shift to a circular economy in my lifetime as well. So, wow, to be around for that, to me, is incredibly exciting. So you just don't hear those stories in the mainstream. And I know there's a fear narrative, and we're just not telling the right stories because our algorithms don't suit that. The social media platforms don't make money unless it's outrage and anger. So it's hard to share these stories, but we've just got to do it. We've just got to be our own outlet for change, our own publisher, and be very selective about what we're putting into this collective hive mind, because it does make a difference. And we've got to start telling a new story about the kind of world we want to create together.
Wow, it does really sound extraordinary. As most most of the activities of it's called regeneration, right? Your social movement, is that mostly centered in Australia, or has it moved further afield?
Here. Yeah, and then when we released the film through the UK just before COVID, and so if you go to the action plan there, some of the actions they're geolocated, so they're pertinent to your particular region. And then the same in the US. So there's a whole series of actions that can be found in the US. And we're sort of doing that in the different countries that we launch in Germany and whatnot, so that it's quite specific. So yeah, it's been really beautiful. And just to see how ready people are, if we give them the right opportunity to get involved. People are desperate to get involved. They want to join, but they don't know what to do when we keep telling them it's all hopeless and doom and gloom, and they shut down and they disengage. That's not the way to do it. We've got to give people solid entry points based on their own passions.
Great. Yeah, I think meeting people where they're at and harnessing those unique skills and that everyone has is going to take it, going to spread it even further than it already is. Yeah. So your kind of signature question for the website anyway is, what's your 2040? Have you received what kind of answers have you received to that question? Because obviously there'll be lots of different opinions out there.
Yeah. It's been beautiful, especially the kids. So a lot of these students do their own exercise at school, and they'll do a whole class project. And even in the UK, actually, we've received the other day, actually, a video from a St. Matthew's school. I can't remember, it was in London somewhere. And the kids all done an answer to that question. And, they've gone out and started making signs so that the parents don't, park their cars and idle too long and leave the fumes out. So they've changed the lanes there. So the drop-offs changed, so they have to walk their kids in, and they've planted all these veggie gardens, and they've got solar, and it's just, when you kickstart people's imagination, and that's, I think, been a big failure of this moment, is that we sort of don't dream as much anymore. We don't give ourselves the capacity or space to imagine or think about what we want to contribute. We are consuming far more culture than we're creating. And whether that's having a podcast in your ear, walking around, or listening to music, or checking social media, we sort of don't let ourselves dream and have that space anymore. I think it's crucial in this moment, because we need the dreamers right now. There's so much up for grabs. We are in a transition of some sort. And so this is a moment for the artists, I think, and the poets and the musicians and the songwriters. And it's their sort of job to infuse that into culture and give it meaning and emotion. And that's how we've evolved to tell stories and share stories. So that's why I thought I wanted to throw it back to the audience and say, look, here's my version of it based on these children that I interviewed around the world. But I'm just a middle-class white guy from Australia. Like, you might vehemently disagree with me. Fantastic. But let's actually start having a legitimate discussion about what kind of future we want. Because if we don't, I guarantee you there's people at Google, there's people at Toyota, there's people at all these companies that are thinking that long-term, and they are currently designing and planning that world to give them the most benefit. So we need to seize our power now, because 2040 is being built in this moment. And I just wanted people to try and just to wake them up from that and say, well, we have capacity far more than we realize. So what's yours? Have a think about it. Talk about it with your family. Talk about it with your kids. Let's just start dreaming again.
That's beautiful. And it really connects with my mission to bring together the artists and the writers and the poets and the dancers, you know, to really, to be those visionaries also, and to evoke that creative spirit in us that enables us to see beyond the status quo. And yet at the same time, we have the Googles and the, you know, and the Amazons who are very able to paint the picture as they think we want to see it, which is all using that language of sustainability and greenwashing essentially their activities, so that we can feel a little less, or feel a clear conscience kind of using their services. But so education feels like a crucial part.
You think of our Hollywood films, and they're all this version of reality that I don't think many of us want. If we look at the way that the future is portrayed in those films, it's not a joyous, abundant nature world. It's the opposite of that. And these are images that we're planting into the subconscious of our children and even ourselves, you know, and we know how powerful images can be. So I do think we need to be careful there. And I love what you're saying about art there. It reminded me of my favorite quote from Terence McKenna, and he had many, was that that the role of the artist is to save the soul of mankind, and anything else is a dithering while Rome burns. If the artist can't find the way, then the way cannot be found. Love
that. Thank you. So, well, I have many more questions, but so I've actually left the UK. I left the UK about over 6 years ago, and I moved off grid to live in Portugal in the countryside. So I live in a community that has a lot of, you know, people who have kind of transitioned away from normal life, let's say, to live in a different setting, but also we're quite remote. So it can often feel a bit disconnected from, you know, the bigger realities. What might you suggest that a community like ours do to kind of, I guess, to share what we've discovered as, you know, within our way of life and our lifestyle choices? Like how in terms of your regeneration movement, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I personally think there hasn't been anywhere near enough storytelling. I think people underestimate the power of that. And often there's people doing extraordinary things, as I discovered, but we need stories to be amplified to inspire and show others and share what we're doing. And sometimes that's neglected. And I think because we are swimming in this sea of content now, we do have to be very conscious of how we tell our stories and understand what people are looking for in this moment. And I think now more than ever, people are yearning to slow down the freneticism. They're yearning for community, genuine connected community. All of us, that's how we evolved. And so for you to tell your story is to sort of tap into that need, those needs that we all have, and say, hey, this is what we're doing. And people can see it in the joy in your faces, or the way you're interacting, or the way that people are living their lives. And it's not to, I guess the danger is it's been very well commandeered that it's it's back to this idyllic life, or it's this sort of hippie. But I think that story is starting to crumble now, especially during COVID, when people have been grounded and at home. Everyone has stopped and reflected and had this sort of global vipassana and said, what the hell were we doing before? Like almost everyone I've spoken to has gone, yeah, I can't believe how much I was running around like an idiot or juggling all these things. So we've been forced into this moment of reflection. So I do think there's an opportunity to share what your community are doing, or there's a softness that maybe might not have cut through a year ago. And I think that's the key, I would say, in terms of anyone amplifying their stories, to really think about the relatable nature of it. What are people yearning for out there at the moment? So what can your story tell that taps into that need? And I would say, from a job I'm doing at the moment, community is the number one thing. From all walks of life, we've just done this interview of thousands of people, and people are yearning for genuine connection. And it seems obvious and trite, but it's not. It's you know, that's how we did it, and we need it, and we wither without it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good reminder that actually community, which was one of the very things that drew me to this way of life, is always at the heart of what we do as humans. You know, we are collective beings. We like to live with each other and to work with each other. So your film centers a lot around your relationship, well, your message to your daughter. How has being a parent shaped your work and your worldview?
Yeah, I think probably more than most people. I feel like before my children, I was prone to self-obsession, and I was, you know, had the blinkers on, and I was very much, it was all about me and what I wanted to do in my career. And then as soon as our first daughter came along, that just disintegrated. And I think it's something around you understand your own lifespan. You know that you've got this point that you're going to get to, and you've got a rough figure in your head about the year that you might be, you know, starting to get old. But then when you have kids, that timeline just extends out even further, another 50 years or so. And so I suddenly became aware that, you know, especially with this problem, the climate and the systemic problem, was that, wow, what kind of world is she going to be living in if I don't contribute in some way? And a big turning point for me was I had been quite self-centered. I had done a lot of acting, which kind of breeds that kind of, I guess, narcissistic quality in people. I haven't acted for 8-9 years. In fact, I really balk when people say I'm still an actor, because I don't think I'll ever do it again. But no, and that's no offense to actors, each to their own.
You do a little bit in the film though, don't you?
Yeah, I get
do a little bit
away
of performing.
With it, yeah. But I got really sick. I had a blood infection, and I was in a hospital with three 80-year-olds, 85-year-olds. And we had this really interesting week of connection and sharing stories. And I couldn't sleep one night, and it was 2 a.m, and I wrote myself a letter as though I was 85 and I was in that bed. And I was just tuning into, have you done the things you wanted to do? Did you have the courage to speak out, break through those fears, actually contribute in some way to give your daughter a better world? And I just thought, God, if I don't, I'm going to not like this moment as an 85-year-old. So it was a bit of a catalyst for me to find the courage. And I did have a lot of insecurities, and the story I was telling in my head was very counterproductive and limiting and paralyzing in a lot of ways. So it took a while to unravel that and understand how that was limiting and holding me back. But once I started to see it and could befriend it and understand it, it sort of set me off on a different path that I absolutely love now, and feel so fulfilled by what I do, and love what I do. And to share this with my daughters now, and to have my own daughter suddenly very interested in the magic of nature. And she talks about mycelium networks, and it's just a 7-year-old who's connected to nature and sees its value and meaning and magic. Gives me enormous pride, and I love sharing this journey with her as well.
Yeah. Wow, that does sound like a key turning point for you. I'm curious, and if you're willing to share, how did you go about unraveling those limiting thought processes that were holding you back?
Yeah, it was incredibly painful. It probably took about 3 or 4 years and involved a variety of different sort of techniques and practices and workshops. And a lot of mine was around my mother. I'd been raised in a pretty intense relationship just with my mother. And so I had to understand some of the programs and patterns I downloaded from her. But to her credit, she did that with me. We went on this journey together to undo some of that. And I think it's just about starting to, I found as I could observe them, instead of just living in them as though they were me and they were wedded to me, I could sort of sit outside them a little bit and start to, I guess it's what they call becoming conscious of them. I could actually watch them, observe them, and then I could see how they were affecting other people. And that for me was quite profound. I remember doing a couple of exercises where the practitioner would get you to tune into someone in your life you care about, like your mother or your father, and you really sit in their energy or their essence. And then they say, what's it like for you when Damon does X, or when he behaves like this? And to actually speak from their perspective lets you see your behaviors in this completely different way. And that for me was incredibly profound in the way I was treating people, women in particular. And so, yeah, I had a huge life change in that moment and met my now wife only a few months later, and we've been together for 12 years. And I hadn't had a relationship longer than 3 months before that. So it had a huge shift. And I guess, as people know, once you take the focus off yourself, you give yourself that capacity to start seeing the collective and other people and the planet, and your perspective shifts to a wider lens. And I sometimes think that's our biggest problem in this moment, is that we've created a system that is so narcissistic, even for people that aren't narcissistic. You can't help but be right now, because we've all got our own individual advertising platforms and stations, and it's all about us. And we've completely eroded this sort of collective sense making or collective existence. And gosh, that's a big challenge that at a time where we need all of us to rally and come together to solve this problem. We're off in our own little silos, in our own little realities, believing our own little stories about how the world works. And that potentially is our greatest challenge if we're going to move forward.
Yeah, so I thank you so much for sharing that. And I realize it's a personal, part of your life. So thank you. But it's a great example of how the process of, social transformation also involves our own personal transformation and our own personal work, to push through all that programming that is holding us in places that isn't ultimately the best place for us to be, for ourselves or for each other. So thank you, for sharing that. And so to what extent do you feel then that coming offline and, stepping out of those social media algorithms is a key part of actually making these meaningful changes? I mean, is it all about coming back to, the day-to-day reality with our communities so that we can move forward? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, I view internet content much like food, like as a nutrition, and there's nutritious content and there's toxic content. And I think sometimes people aren't even aware that they're consuming that toxic content, and they're perfectly lovely, beautiful humans that just get hijacked, and they're suddenly in all these discussions that they, would never do in real life face to face. So I do think that as much as we can use that sparingly, it's going to be best for us. It's tricky because there are lots of positives to it, and it's also a tool for us to connect and do beautiful things together. And increasingly, there's people doing wonderful things with it around, supply chain, blockchain, decentralized energy, sharing apps for communities. So it really is a duality there. So I certainly don't think we should shun the whole thing, but I think we will evolve to use it as a tool that it is in a much smarter way. I do think we are so adolescent in the way we use the internet right now that we are the narcissistic teenager that's taking selfies of ourselves, whereas we might get to a stage where it becomes just a beautiful collaborative tool that we can achieve wonderful things with together, but we haven't reached that phase yet. So, you know, my wife and I talk about this a lot because obviously we've got 2 daughters, we've got a 7-year-old now, and, you know, she's going to enter that world in the next sort of 4 or 5 years. And you know, at the moment, if you're that parent, that outlier, then you could actually potentially cause harm to your child because they're not in a social group because everyone else is online having conversations. And so we actually do need to all attack this together. We need to get a group of parents or a school to all do it collectively, so there isn't those people that are missing out. And I think there's enough evidence and science emerging now about the impact of these, especially the social media, not the internet, but these public conversations, especially on young minds and girls in particular, especially 12, 13. What a fragile time that is. And we need to nurture that and not just hand it over blindly to some organization. And I think we're almost got enough feedback now that a lot of people are starting to go, okay, this is not beneficial to us. So, yeah, it's an extraordinary time. We have such a complex system. You know, if it's not one thing, it's the other thing, and they're all, you know, it's very hard, especially being a parent these days. But I think the more we can simplify that, as you're saying, is to step away from that sometimes, gather yourself, find your own sovereignty, find your own strength and essence, and then step back in and feel like you're not being pushed and pulled and blown around by the madness of it all. I think that's more important than ever.
So you mentioned the impact on girls and young women being particularly vulnerable to the messaging. There was a sort of an aha moment in the film where you're talking with Paul Hawken, and he talks about the impact that women's empowerment can have on the world. Was that one of your most surprising discoveries, or if not, what was of the Making 2040?
Yeah. The seaweed one was pretty mind blowing to me. Like, seaweed. It sounds so benign, but it's not. Obviously, the microgrids were really interesting, but yeah, the girls one, I guess because empowering girls and women to me is like something we should do regardless. Like, to have a stronger feminine energy on the new system we build that's it. And that's why I love that Kate Raworth was the center of the film and everything pivoted around her, because her design, her whole architecture is such a nurturing, beautiful essence. So I'd always sort of thought that we should be doing that anyway, but then to learn about that impact, that if we do educate and empower those girls and women, give them access to reproductive health services and viable work opportunities, the difference there of them choosing to have their own children and having 2 if they stay at school versus 5 or more if they're taken out of school for religious reasons or to work or whatnot. That's an extra 1.1 billion people by 2050, which has an enormous impact on our resources, climate change. So it's just an incredible aha moment for me too, of saying, let's do that anyway. Let's empower girls and women because there's so many benefits. But then we also get this impact on the climate. And as Project Drawdown found, that when you combine that reproductive health services with the empowering and education, it's the #1 solution to reversing global warming, which is just not talked about enough.
Wow. So if you had, the eyes of the world on you to talk about, the systemic changes that you feel the world needs most, what would your top 3 be?
Oh my God, that's such a hard question. I don't think we can tinker around the edges with this system anymore. I don't think there's a sort of an add-on fix. I think we have to go right to the very foundations of how this system works, and that it is predicated on intense competition, on a domination mindset of competing, predatorial, conquer, climb the ladder. And unless we change those incentives, I don't think we're going to get there. I think the new system has to be predicated on interconnected relationships and regenerative relationships and distributive relationships, like nature works, like the soil works. The more you understand soil and the bi-directional flow of fungi and microorganisms, it's all there. I mean, nature, you know, people have said it isn't survival of the fittest, it's survival of the collaboration. That's who makes it through in nature, is there is a symbiosis, and we're doing the opposite. And again, as I was saying before, you look to hunter-gatherer tribes. If someone showed sociopathic tendencies, they were ostracized from the tribe. They were either ridiculed and laughed at to bring them back down to the group and say, oh, that's not a very good, you know, if the young buck strode in with this big catch of a hunt, they'd all laugh at him and say, oh, that's not very good. They wouldn't praise him because they knew that would disturb the equilibrium of the group. We've done the opposite. We reward that person who comes strutting back in, and we make them CEO, we make them president. And again, they set the rules of the game and they incentivize that behavior. And so everyone else thinks, I've got to be like that to reach those positions. What a perverse set of incentives. So if I had to change anything, I would flip the architecture at the very core of the system. And that's what I love about regenerative agriculture. It's what I love about decentralized microgrids, is that it's incentivizing completely different community-based, nature-based ways of operating and interacting.
So it's like, basing the whole way we work on cooperation as opposed to power over relationships.
That's right. You know, and that's obviously, that's a generational challenge, because there's so much inertia in the system now, and people would think, oh, that's impossible. And we've all been told that we're selfish. We've got this selfish gene. That's who we are as humans. I just disagree. I think, yes, it is a part of us. We have that trait. We're capable of that. But we have a system that incentivizes and brings out that trait. So, of course, it's prevalent. But if we incentivize a system that was rewarded cooperative behaviors and shared, then it would bring out that part of, if people thought they could get further along by doing that. So it's never black and white, of course, but I just... I believe in humans, and I think we've all got our baggage and we've all accumulated, like I had my own stuff. But underneath that, I saw that, no, there was a good human in there. And I think the majority of us, of course, there's exceptions, want a better future, want a better world. That's why everyone's into conspiracy theories right now. That's why all these narratives are flying around, because people want it to be better than it is. Like, we actually have an incredible amount in common. We're just going about it in a slightly different way, but we're all yearning and hurting and angry online because we want to be connected. We want it to be different than what it is. We don't like this system. We just don't know how to articulate it or where we're going.
So acknowledging that we do have, there is an aspect of us that is selfish, you know, that is self-centered or that self-preservation instinct, let's say. Perhaps a way of honoring that within a cooperative society is to encourage all our individual gifts and qualities and skills to come to the fore, so that we're not talking about treating everyone the same, are we? We're not talking about everyone being this kind of cogs in a machine, but that everyone's individuality is honored and celebrated and respected, but with the spirit of cooperativism as the base.
So you can still be an engineer, you can still be a filmmaker, you can still be a dancer, you can still be a doctor, whatever it is, but you don't have to climb this ladder to get to the top. You can use your skills for the betterment of society. I mean, it's not that big a shift, and a lot of people are already doing it. It's just that we're just letting these people, very small group of people, accrue all the power
and the money,
and the money and the rules, and it's just silly, because I would say 99% of us are altruistic and want a better world. We're just not willing to step all over everyone else and show no empathy to get what but those people do, because the system rewards them for doing it. It's so obvious, really. But it's not gonna change unless we flip those incentives around.
Yeah. So what's next for you and for the 2040 movement?
So we'll just, it still sort of rolls on in its own beautiful way. And that's what always was the intention, that we would, you know, it wouldn't be a centralized system, that it would be, have a life of its own. And it's just been wonderful. You know, people put on regeneration weekends, and people are doing regeneration tree plantings, and there's all sorts of lovely things going on. So I feel like that's sort of got its own life. And then, you know, my work these days is, lots of people have asked us to tell stories around, you know, beautiful solutions that they're doing. So, and I do it similarly to how I did it in the film. We'll go and film what they're doing and then extrapolate it and use the visions to show what it would look like in the future. And just remarkable things that people are doing right now, from, you know, planting edible trees to, you know, huge seaweed kelp initiatives. There's just so much going on. So there's that world that's happening. I'm doing something with Paul Hawkins. So Paul Hawkins got another book coming out next year called Regeneration. That's another 80 actions and initiatives and solutions, and focusing on some wonderful people that are doing things. So him and I are speaking regularly, and I'm doing the content for that. So we're going to get some pieces out for that. And then I'm doing something really special to me, which is a specific Australia vision. We've done this exercise listening around the country to find out where people are at after the bushfires and after COVID. And then we asked them what kind of world or what kind of Australia they'd like to emerge from this time. And it's been really interesting to hear all their thoughts. And so I've put that into a narrative with lots of visual effects to show people what it could look like, and to show people how much they have in common with people they'd be surprised to learn about. And we've got them speaking on camera, you know, and even though they're not using the same language, they're all talking about greener hills again, and flowing rivers, and embedding Indigenous knowledge, and bringing in our beautiful Aboriginal ancestors to share this moment and help us heal the land. So even conservative farmers, you know, so it's been really lovely. I feel like my own country is going to go through a very interesting transformation in the next 10 or 15 years.
Wow, that sounds really powerful, because, you know, when we think about things on a global scale, it can just seem too big and just too hard to achieve any significant change. But when you start even just bringing it down to a country level, and even a big country like Australia, you know, it starts to feel like, yes, you know, if we could get some local governments on board and then national government, you know, we can really make something, a significant shift. Yeah, that's great.
That's the future,
where can
I
we
think.
find, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that is the future. We talked about all this, is that this sort of monarch, hierarchical, top-down system, it's just done. It's just, the system's too complex now to have decisions made from a centralized place. It's too complex. No one entity or authority can keep up with everything. So I do think we're going to move, and the future is these very empowered tiny cells that connect together to form a larger, stronger organism. And I think without that being nationalism, I think that is a sort of community-led, local. We've got the energy technology now to do it. We've got the food to be able to do it in our own regions. And that to me is an exciting way to start a new system, whatever it might be, is very much based on that sort of empowered local community.
Great, yeah. And where can we find these more recent films that you've been making, looking at other solutions?
Yeah, so a lot of those we have sort of like a 2040 YouTube channel. So a lot of those are on there, and different initiatives and we have a pretty active social media page. We put out a couple of videos every week, and often focus on someone, or, you know, that's doing something amazing, or saw 2040 and quit their job, and now they've started some incredible initiative, an edible coffee cup, or a biodegradable, you know, package, or whatever it might be. It's we call them the regenerators. And you know, so there's lots of content if people want to get inspired, and I'd encourage anyone to go and activate your plan and fill out your preferences and see what pops up for you, because you might be surprised, or you'll definitely learn about something that you might be able to get involved in. Great,
thank you. I'd love to talk with you more at some point about how Systems Change Alliance could work with you, you know, support your work and vice versa. It'd be really, really great to have that conversation.
Love to, yeah.
The final question to you. What would you say to any up and coming filmmakers out there who are addressing social change issues? What's your golden
just that
of
this is
inspiration?
your moment. This is the moment. If ever there was a moment for, you know, telling stories about this moment, we need the filmmakers. As we've said, we need the storytellers more than ever. I often lament that when I was young, there were some very big bands singing about system change and trying to rage against the machine, and that really moved me forward as a teenager. But now there's no big bands singing about climate change or singing about, you know, this systemic problem, and it's all become a little bit homogenized. And I know there's bands out there, but not on that sort of big, you know, stadium scale. So I just think, gosh, what a moment for any artist. This is it. This is your time. It's not going to get better than this. And to understand the significance of your role. It's not about just making entertainment. We need emotions right now. We need to get out of this academic graphs, facts, overly scientific rationale, especially around climate change, and drop that right down into people's hearts and move them and stir them into action. Because we're not going to get them into action by talking about 1.5 degrees and anthropogenic emissions. It's just, those words do nothing for the human soul. We need the artists and the filmmakers to make it a visceral and emotional experience.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining me today and just being so open and sharing all that you're working on. It truly is inspirational. I'm really so happy to have had this chat with you. And
me too,
for
Roshnii.
those of you,
I love what you're doing as well. And you know, even your name, I lit up when I saw it, because I was like, I just love these conversations. And I just think it's, like I said, it's a privilege in this moment to be alive. Whatever happens, you know, it's the peril and the possibility is all happening at the same time. And you know, I think we should embrace it and sit in it and enjoy the complexity of this moment and have these conversations. So thank you for hosting.
Yeah, thanks, and good luck with everything that you're doing. For those of you who are watching and haven't yet seen the film, I encourage you to do so, and you can find all about what Damon and his team are up to at what'syour2040.com, and obviously their social media channels. So yeah, thanks again, Damon. I look forward to hopefully speaking to you again in the future. And
Definitely,
take
Roshnii.
care. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Thanks. Bye-bye.